Bichuna Tenzaba Kodom de la Chancho. The Kozo Pache Muji Sawa Isare, Manjimale. Ani Danato Kazone, Nila Chi Gamja Chitendera. The Kozo Malena, you Kozo Savari, no Tedangazo. Ani Jonchi is same gums at La Nila. Borom Chini Jindogoyura, Mato Tazi, Chisinche Tanjit and the Sanji Show, say at Zunga, Cosentada the Euro Gemarti. Ngela nga tso chi ta rong cho la cha pa to je sho la dong wa de chang dong gu lu chi nyo ra de ni pa se ni dong nyang chi go gu yo re de nga tso ta ani sem ke go wa ngo la ani dong nyang go to shi che gu de ta dong nyang se che te re kan de go gu tu la na chi su su ke cho chi ta pe pin ja to so de ni nga tso cha pa ba yo re ta ma yin be su su la ma ga wa ka ma tsa te ni control ba yo re 드니가 다소소 지 차바지사 마인베 컨트롤지사만 뭐 벌마지도 설nya 딘오지 다스제 통제 딘오지 아니 지 가시를 차바 가시를 동아 마인베 차동의 로도 저니 아니 드니가 로지 야 길기보다 대치 공고들라.
So before we begin today's lesson, we are going to start by meditating. However, when we start meditating, we normally develop within the meditation a motivation of attaining enlightenment for all sentient beings. However, this is really not realistic to start thinking in terms of all sentient beings if we first haven't developed equanimity. So the mind of equanimity is a mind that is free of two extremes. Is a mind that is free from discriminating between friends and discriminating between enemies. So normally our mind is always going from one extreme to the other towards our loved ones, our family and friends. We feel attachment, and towards those people that we don't like, that we feel they're our enemies, we feel hatred or we feel anger or we feel some sort of aversion. So our mind is always kind of oscillating, is going from one extreme to the other. So what we're trying to do is to free our mind of these two extremes by cultivating what we call equanimity.
당아서 던지지는 감말제마다 도망가서 리게 쫄럭 되고 싫어 리게 쫄럭 저도 너무 추제제 제스죠 다 동보 공반이 찌럽자 등의 라반인들이 지는 여자지 아니 소반들이 지는 동무지 아니 고마테즈 데 섬저로서 마크 등의 문나치 법바지 지야케를 저 셔로 보자지 어떤이 제주 제지 써요래 아니 단다 고소 까마치스 찌럽자는 들이 대로질라다.
And before we begin meditating, we have to establish the posture. We need to set our bodily posture. And this is normally referred to as the 7 or 8 Vairocana points of the posture. And normally we keep our legs crossed. Then with our legs crossed, sitting on a cushion, we put our hands in our lap, normally the right hand above the left hand. Our back is straight, our shoulders go down. Then that's the shape. You can place your hands in the shape that Geshe is showing right now. So you put one hand on top of the other and you make your thumbs touch. So right on top of left and your thumbs touch. Then your back is straight, your shoulders are relaxed, your chin goes slightly towards your chest. So not looking up, but slightly towards your down towards your chest. And you can relax your eyes. You can either close your eyes or you can direct your eyes in the direction of your nose or just close your eyes. And we start meditating like that.
단트리진이 되와라 아니 가르치니 배도 열에서 고박가리 열에서 제동아서 지 급자고 돼야 또 용나마니야 또 든지 마치니 인심이지 느리진이 되와라 가리 열에라나 때라 아니 지중성 열에라다.
And we might question, why do we need to stay in this posture? What are the benefits of staying in this posture? And there are 3 main benefits.
다 제주 동보도 가려요지나니 맞아 리 좀못 제발라 되니 리가 짜 기동사들 추대도 동tra 대여레스 대동여레스 디가 짜서 바 리를 좀 야부지니 대 리를 좀 야부지 되나 디노 롱디가나 롱야부지레스 롱리 싸가 롱야부지나 리가 디와 땅가서 리시 용세 디와 리가 디와 지니레스 제제 동보티레스.
So one thing that will happen whenever we acquire this posture is that within our body, there are all of these channels. We call them channels. There are 14,000 different channels within our body. And with all these channels, when we set our posture in this way, allow for our inner winds, another word for winds, our energy, our inner energy to flow correctly. So if the winds can flow correctly through all of our channels, then our body becomes comfortable. We experience pleasure. We have pleasurable feelings in our body.
Tani ta giba toma chewa ina giba manawa to. Tani liga sopa manawa to. Ani ndri chewa to nyesh tama karwa to. Nyatsi manawa to. O tani ki chechu chi yore, ki chechu nipa tres.
So this is the first benefit, the one I just mentioned. Now, the second benefit is that whenever we keep our back straight, shoulders relaxed, then we put our chin closer to our chest. This will avoid certain pains in our body from arising, so back pain and shoulder pain and neck pain and so on. So this is the second benefit.
Ani ta tombo do ta chechu ngoni zon do ta susu li tomo yapo songa teni sin tomo yapo son tores. Se tomo yapo songa teni sin ka mupa karala yina yon tila tembo ni towa ka sin ta tingi zi tembo ni towa ka ani goba chi yore la.
And the third benefit, which is really the main benefit, is that whenever we keep our back straight and our winds can flow properly through our bodies, our mind can stabilize. So our minds become stable. And when our minds are stable, we're able to focus on an object without distraction and therefore cultivate concentration more easy.
Tani lapa indusi chea, koko chea, tika nimansu yoresi. Te nimansu wa diwa ka hodi jani, ani tini ya tröle ni, ta nga so pali chungi kamsi ya ngoto tsula ni diru. Te tröde ka kanda ta chapa no jere do. Te maa shi ni, ani li maa poti ni li ka diwa ta legire. Ten suyi che tala nika nimanu je, ondri chini koko so kwa ta tere.
There is also a reason why we set our hands in this posture. Normally, whenever we put our hands like this, it allows for the heat that normally abides on the top of our bodies around our head to descend from the top of our bodies to the center of our body. And this once again produces pleasurable feelings.
Ta nga so tandi chini ta ane nga so kara zina ka na tonyo, ta nga so nyamle kara chewa ina thomas tonyo tingi na dogore, di tonyo zeya ta nga so tere, jito tonyo na mambo yorti, sanche kashi le chab, kashi le donwa, tandi ko lo to pa ka ni, ta kashi le ni dongo ato, kashi le chago yi jinse kongyo yo ma re, ane soso gongyo ni diwan do pa to dinga mando wa re, hoi ngoni yo diwan do pa to dinga mando wa, kanga ma soma chigyo re, soso diwan do pa to dinga mando wa no she koi tere, di sa kongla kashi le chaba to kashi le donwa zeya, sawa ni machi sawa ka, ane tindi chini gawshana, nga so tonyo gasa no tindo re la.
Before we engage in any practice, meditation practice, it's important to start by cultivating equanimity, just like I mentioned before. And in general, we can specify different types of equanimity, but the equanimity we're referring to here, it's a mind that is free from these two extremes that I was mentioning before, the extreme of attachment and the extreme of aversion. So normally we feel attachments towards some and aversion towards others. So when we think about it, there's actually no reason, no valid reason for which to feel certain, for certain people attachment, for certain people aversion, because if we look deeply, all of us wish for the same. We all wish to be happy and none of us wish to suffer. So in that sense, we're all the same. So here equanimity means to regard all sentient beings exactly the same in terms of all wishing to be happy and none of us wishing to suffer.
Ta tindi chini nga so rangi diwando dinga mando, zhengi diwando dinga mando wa jiba iti sanchi sam batoma yanchi la nga nguni nopa zewa chuni miki kati ina chi ni diwa tomato na nopa miki kashi nga la gagwa, kashi nga la dongwa chuni me sawa ka tindi chini sem karma chitsila ya gopta taro chila.
So let's try to meditate for a minute or so, thinking that since all of us want to be happy and none of us wish to suffer, just like me, I'm going to avoid harming any sentient being at all whatsoever, even the smallest ant, I'm not going to harm them. And even if I cannot make them happy, I'm going to avoid harming them. I'm going to avoid harming them. I'm going to try to make all sentient beings happy.
아니 나도 감정이 거슬러 지도니 단 지도니 리도 아니 생각을 용도 제차와이나도 그 니마치를 배 기체 제рем 바카제 되는 내가 지요 말에 이나 토머 용에나 토머 거마치 되니 거마니 칼리 에코안도 나마도 돈보네 배 거마가 투투데 치치 뜨니 데와이나 티케테스 퀄리티데 티데 토머 용에나 칼리 토머 거마치 데도 무파치라 무니 데도다 디 아보 가나니 거마니 되니 거마삼 되니 야 제리 야 토마토 토마니 아니 다 패트니진 데나 번스랑 가서 생야고만이 녀션도니 니 코트무 오는도니 데 생각을 데려라다.
Whenever we're meditating, I mean, if we're experienced meditators, we can meditate for as long as we want and we won't get tired. Our minds nor our bodies will get tired. However, if we're beginners, it's very important that we do not exceed the recommended time, which is very, very short at the beginning. We should try to meditate for 1 minute and then 2 minutes and then 3 minutes, because if we extend excessively the duration of meditation, even 5, 6, 10 minutes, this will make our bodies and our minds tired. So at first, when we're beginners, it's important to meditate for just 1 minute, and then if we see that we're able during the course of that minute to meditate correctly, our minds can stay with the object and so on, then we can extend to 2 minutes. Then if that works, for 3 minutes, and if that works, for 4 minutes, like that gradually. Otherwise, if we do very long sessions and we don't know how to work with our minds, it's likely that our minds will fall into laxitude, into kind of a sleepiness. And this is the trigger for ignorance. This makes ignorance to develop.
다데니 gang 티세틀로 딕 쳬버체나요 모치와도 조키 다체 제바 조방아무 치세 제바 동 som바티니 연로니 아니 감조나 리파테모 리파세보 야비요레스 가르레스나 군다메니 커리코슬 네마케 니타치 소소기치 강아토 차소뇽모 가리 요나요 디토바트 노토도 마뉴린도 다니까 원기 트메뉴린도 조킹아마티 리파서버도 텐디 요티 조킹아폴로 테스나스 로니 겁타나 아니 야비요레스.
And the best time to meditate is early in the morning. There are some people who wake up at 3 in the morning and 4 in the morning, and it is said that at 3 and 4 in the morning, our minds are very, very clear and are very, very stable, because later on in the day, many thoughts arise and many conceptual thoughts, discursive thoughts arise, and then it is harder to meditate. So if we're able to wake up early, maybe not that early, but if we're able to wake up early or meditate first in the that this is the best time to meditate because our minds are very clear.
Tani ngaso gamche kasero tagas mitsa del dia maimba. Ani koroga ga tanda ngaso tonyon da gawayina suje kashila chago to kashila dongui ta gemse la songong dongures dela dongui gemse kar dela chago gemse kare. To so ni ngoni china dela chago to dela dongwa zawani ni yomare. To so maybe gemse la songong toni yenchi michi gemse la songong toina gam to jegawze ni ba chirin la ma. Tagas mitsa de dewaina ko gamda ni chi munpasi na munge ko lo ta sipachi le re di lo lo ngorcha yo sa to nishi yo sa to tandi lo shimpachi le to ma de yin chi me chi kebar che ko re la.
And whenever we meditate, meditation is not just about closing our eyes and staying quiet and silent and still, but rather is about, in this case, generating a correct understanding of reality. So in the case of equanimity, if we want to develop equanimity, we would investigate within our minds the fact that we feel attachment towards some, we feel aversion towards others. So if we're meditating, we should think about, during meditation, we should think about the reasons. Why do I feel attachment towards some? Why do I feel anger? Why do I feel aversion towards others? And then thinking about those reasons of why you do, you then think about reasons why it doesn't make any sense actually, and you investigate and familiarize and habituate your mind with the reasons why it makes no sense to feel attachment and to feel hatred towards one some and others not.
Ni nga zo tani ki chini da ni kashila cha kashila do mani mi jinse la solo to ti karazena chi soso la pe tongge chi do soso chi gabani pe tala soso cha de yore soso la ti sa katula magawa chenge to chi soso la control de yore da tandi la pasho to la control go soso to la chi gago tandi yo mares karazena tala ani chi lojin da tandi mo chi so yore.
If we really do think about this topic of equanimity, we will see that we feel attachment towards those people who have benefited us in some sort of way. So we like people who benefit us. And whenever there is someone who has harmed us in any way, we develop a dislike of that person. We develop some sort of aversion towards that person.
아니 나게말라 papa kata yana se jaga ni da chamba chi yures de cholo tongcho no de tongsi no de pomo chi ke bui chi ni lapa no ponto pon ani khani sha chi za ani wol chi chi le yo sara chitele ko donja chike sha nyote ko chitele pardon tri cha ka ani ta kimejin tong isares
Ale puchi pumola.
아마지 그 보모 아마지 그 김에지 코로가 다 코로로 보이지 기니 코로 라바노 보이지 본토를 라바는 생으로와 아니 코로가 라바 카야게 샤지자데레스 샤 아니 원래 체지가 그 샤다 샤요디 코치가 되진 게 저와 되게 저디 그 되게 아니 쳇도 파시니 쳇도 동레스 코로가 샤지자 네 바이라라 보이지 본 어디니 지네 통요레스 다음 요레스.
So in relation to this, there are many stories that show why it makes no sense to feel attachment towards some and aversion towards others. And one of these stories tells the story of a woman, and this woman has a baby. She has given birth and she has a baby and she's holding the baby, right? And while she's holding the baby, she's eating a piece of meat. So she has the piece of meat in her hand and she's about to eat it. But then they have a dog. There's a family dog in the house. And this family dog sees the woman eating meat, and the dog jumps and barks to try to get the meat from the woman. So the woman hits the dog.
Tati ni taki papa katayana ka ngoshi ka tawti koroka zandaya ka shati ani ngema tiangama ti koroka papa ti shini lig tiwale ani lig ta koshani shat zayores koroka tiangama ka amati chik tiale ni magi ola chat de res korolano pol de ka ni puti tiangama koro singi ka dadres ti ta ko siche yore pasha za mash maladon 아니 세비다고 본들레 어제 티지 요래서 어디에 단지 템빈 크로아지야 들라 하버트 지 가스 사텔지 차제 제와도 마가스다 동안 드니 시집지야 요마레마도 그 담단도 되그래서 어디 송그래서
Geshe la tanda ki di ame ki gyogarebe.
어찌데 그러고 단다 아메 부봉게가 김이지 요라 되게 지양아마 아마데 측지알레 되그래서 이거 측동도
Kemen
그러고
ki ama. Eso.
김인기 아마 김에 그러고 샤지자 되어라 샤디
Kemen ki
그냥
para.
아마 그러고 발라게 아니 샤 아니 발라데 신이 릭지발레 아니 릭드 샤니 코디기 샤드자요레스 그러고 라노 저데가 부이데 바일라라 디데 아니 그냥 아마 그러 생이 그 도드레스 다티오데 바바카데 아나 그 지제지 파샤 자시 말라도 세비다오 본돌레 추기 아니 추미 추기 아니 리판샤 지텐달라 아니 야린 사자 오고 지지 송요레스
Mm. So there's this situation going on, and then there at that point there was a Buddha. There was a Buddha of an ancient Buddha at that time, and that Buddha saw that the whole situation was funny because the kid that the mother was holding was actually her enemy that the family killed in that life. The dog that was trying to eat the meat was that woman's mother, and the meat that she was about to eat was the meat of the woman's father. So here there is a very famous quote saying that we have to be very careful towards whom we feel attachment, towards whom we feel hatred. It makes no sense because at the end, within cyclic existence, we're all taking rebirth and connecting in many different ways, and our enemy in past lives can be our friends in this life, and whoever were our friends in past life can be our enemies in this life.
다티 뜻이고 가르레스나 다티 가서 소소그 집에 벤자다오도 집도서도 배 차지셨다 지야요 말을 단다도 오늘 소소로 같이 좀 파마 벤제레디나 지양아마 소소 생이게 지와 제용을했어 다 소소그 집 마드가사도 집던솔이나 배 하조고 배 컨트롤도 배 드리지야요 말했어 다다 소소그 단다 오레디나요 지양아마를 소소로 같이 좀 파마행게 드리 제용게 드리요디 도솔로 때니 다 심지 슬리나오 가실을 차 가실을 동화세가 로트마시 총리 동거래에서 돈다 띠리를
So this story clearly shows that it makes no sense to feel so much hatred and so much hatred or aversion or so much attachment to some and not to others, because we see that someone who can be our most loved person in our previous life, like for example our mother, can become someone who become the object of our anger in this life. Like for example, the mother who had taken rebirth as the dog that was trying to steal the meat from the mother. Or for example, it makes no sense to grasp so much to our anger and aversion towards someone, because someone who was our enemy in past life might in this life become an object of our love, someone we love very much. Like for example, the baby that the woman was holding, the woman was holding was her enemy in the previous life, and now it had become the child of the woman in that life. So it makes no sense to grasp so much towards the anger and towards the attachment, because we're constantly changing roles within cyclic existence.
내가 저다 띵고니 마 친조이니 저저 좋아요나 카티 가라 티키티키지 야운도 마도 올라 디세시라면도 아니 저러서 지 똑반다고 또 마시바도 지 니시에너 제와도 띵이기 제도 만들어 드리요나요 저러서 카티야 로로지 했었다.
Lesson. So now we're going to continue the lesson where we left it off on Friday. That was our last class. However, if you have any questions, you don't need to wait until the end to ask your questions. You can ask your questions directly. You can just raise your hand, or you can write them on the Zoom chat, and we'll answer your questions. If you're there on site in Dharamsala, you can raise your hand and you can ask your question.
네, 당한 소지 아니 뭐 동다 선시에도 쓰이나 소소 디지털 때라 아니 당가서 넘바 손집이 용고는 메시오를 제동 링화 예상게 아니 디지털 링화 예상게 디친고는 용고래 디디 디치 매파도 등원성게 용 링화 예상고니 등원서요래 디디 다 링화 예상기 고니 다 안가서 등원서 제틀랑 가서 넘바 용고노라 먹기와 아지 먹기와 지제 다니죠를 가서니 티코니 먹기와 체크모는 로타엔 시트 로세레스.
So in the previous class, we were talking about actions of body, speech, and mind. Why were we talking about these actions? Because we want to be happy and we do not wish to suffer. So if that is the case, we have to choose our actions correctly, because our happiness comes from our physical, our verbal, and our mental actions, but also our suffering comes from our physical, our verbal, and our mental actions. So we must avoid those actions that create suffering, and those were the 10 non-virtuous actions which were specified in the text that we're studying, which you probably have. And we've already finished the last of those 10 actions, which was wrong views.
Liji magiwa sam, maki magiwa vje, iji magiwa sam talab chira. Tate soso la tsajirwa ina, soso ka ngani ta chi zeshe patong. Tani, karako, tsitsam mawa tong. Tani ngancho she patong. Tani chama zaya ta mani polan zani kejan ramada she atiti. Ale soso i makiwa zule, je i makiwa zule, siti ngaki ngani. Ta, tila ngaso ngaki magiwa azya mi tares.
So these 10 non-virtuous actions are conformed by 3 physical harmful actions, 4 verbal harmful actions, and 3 mental harmful actions. In terms of speech, we have 4 main actions, and actions that are harmful both for us and for others are 1, lying, 2, using offensive words or harsh speech, 3, divisive speech, so creating disharmony among people so that they don't get along, and 4, gossiping.
Anita liji magiwa tala samze, tangazo sinje jingi sokcho bachi, tani majimba lembachi, tini ngazo loyal che bachi ura, ti samda liji ngone re, liji magiwa. Ta tiki yon, ta chi majimba leba ina rangli yon nole, jeli yon nole, loyal che na yon, susoli yon nole, jeli yon nole, ta sokcho na to yinba na uchi na, rangje tsoma la nole, ti la ngazo liji magiwa asini ti tawere, so liki likares.
Then the physical non-virtuous actions are the action of taking someone's life, so killing, stealing, and having sexual misconduct. So these three physical harmful actions are, once again, they're harmful towards oneself, but they're also harmful towards others whenever we do them.
Tani ta yiji ta nong senlo to la ji nasam to nasam lota je nasam lona ji maji la ti chopi kani loni ti go ni ji spe chani seng no pa jerem de de nasam je de tombo kunchu ji ni ta mong bang anda la pa ji khate ji jam da no ji te go to sa no so sen de jere nya de ati nasam ta lota je na ji yo pa me pa ta wa de chi lota de ati yin ba la mai ba to so so ton de ati lota re ti mong gi ta su su ke ngoni tani ma ji wa choma de zo gre la.
And then we have 3 non-virtuous mental actions. The first one is covetousness, and covetousness means that we feel a very strong attachment towards something that someone else has, and we kind of strategize. We create a strategy to obtain that which belongs to someone else. Then there is maliciousness or harmful intent. And this means when we feel a lot of aversion, a lot of anger or hatred towards someone, and then we plan to get vengeance one day. I'm going to harm you one day. I'm going to get back to you one day. This is harmful intent. And then the third one is wrong view. And wrong view is whenever we think that something that exists does not exist, or something that doesn't exist actually exists. So it's kind of superimposing something inexistent upon reality, or negating something that exists from reality.
Tati de ngaso tanda te ko magiwa chicken noni ngagi magiwa jete dare ngaso ngada ngakini ngachwa ngadare liji magiwa samda zires nta yam to khato tini je number ichi zingsia te o ti chuma te ni zi to ngare la ta iki magiwa te shibaro.
So the three physical non-virtuous actions, they are form because they are performed with the body. So they are form. The four non-virtuous verbal actions, they are speech. And the three non-virtuous mental actions, they are consciousness.
다도 소마데 가서 뭐 이니 뇨모도 간이 기오레라나 다다기 가서 가서니 그저 덴바시에서 노니 다 폼봉아 컴 제시 전이 갑자기 송도 디노네 폼봉아 솔마 테니 기오레라 다 이게 니가 그저 덴바 송와티도 워가 먹기와 송와티도 냠저 요그시르 다나니 마가디나 소도 쳬데노도 디 아비더마 코시칸제 다다 로베이니 게소 pass Carolina, pass dadin landa, lobini. Diga songa no pondo kego riki to pombo ni kenche kama easy aga, dino ne pombo she batelatini mangaso, ani magiwat le de orelata.
So these 10 non-virtuous actions normally arise due to affliction. So we have afflictions in our minds, right? And these afflictions, how do they arise? They arise on the basis of our five aggregates, mainly of our consciousness. Our consciousness is explained in terms of the five aggregates. Normally we say, when we talk about conventional truth, let's say that the five aggregates, they are part of the conventional truth, and we have the five aggregates, the 12 sources of experience, and the 18 elements. These are all mentioned in the book, so don't worry about memorizing them. You can look them up in the book. But within the five aggregates, we have the aggregate of consciousness. And within the aggregate of consciousness, afflictions arise.
다 가서 폼봉알 때니 가리키를 다나 가서 ngaki magiwa jeto liki magiwa jeto zigi pombo chadere tani yiki magiwa soto ndachigi pombo chadere pombo ngaka nolata zigi pombo sawi pombo ndachigi pombo ndachigi pombo number shibi pombo ze pombo ngayero.
So mainly we have these five aggregates. The five aggregates are the aggregate of form, the aggregate of feeling, the aggregate of discernment, the aggregate of compositional factor, and the aggregate of consciousness. So we were looking at the 10 non-virtuous actions, right? How do the 10 non-virtuous actions relate to the five aggregates? Well, we said that the three physical non-virtuous actions and the four verbal non-virtuous actions, they are form and speech. So both of them, they go within the aggregate of form, whereas the three mental non-virtuous actions, they go within the aggregate of compositional factors.
다 ngazo ani zigi pombo sawi pombo tan sawala na zigi pombo na ngazo migan ponde ka ta rangi jiji tipi ziyele rangi jiji mate bi chi chosi to kamjala so pale zijare tani dato choto roto recha tsomala zijaderwa tani sawa se ta soso ke chi dewa nywa to dingo nywa soso ke nywi dani chi res ani sawa ndashi zegi tere no ngombo da sorbo no pore no pomore zya ka no ishinge telen dashi jares ta tani mayin be ka sinju zi sawa ndashi number shiba mayin be ka ani ndichi tamshi tala ndachi ki pombo le di ta ngaso ndichi kiji ki nyawan ro kyosa tsoma di pombo ngana ya da jakure.
So if we look closely at the five aggregates, we find ourselves with the aggregate of form. So by the way, the five aggregates speak of our body and our minds, right? What we human beings are made of. So first we have the aggregate of form, and this refers to our body. It refers to form, to sound, to smell. It refers to taste, and it refers to the objects of touch. So all of these objects are condensed or categorized within the aggregate of form. Then we have the aggregate of feeling, and the aggregate of feeling talks about our feelings, our pleasurable feelings, our unpleasurable feelings, and our neutral feelings. So whenever we have these physical sensations which are pleasurable or non-pleasurable or neutral. Then we have discernment, and the aggregate of discernment is our capacity to discern or to differentiate between things. So we say, oh, this is green and this is yellow. This is a boy, this is a girl, this is short, this is long. So this is our capacity to distinguish, our capacity to discern. So this is the aggregate of discernment. Then we have the aggregate of compositional factors, and compositional factors talk about mental functions. So all of the functions that our mind is able to perform. So we have then the fifth aggregate, which is consciousness. So compositional factors will be all of the mental functions which are not consciousness, right? So all our mental function are a function to remember, our function for introspection, the function of getting angry or jealous, whatever. All of those are mental functions, and they are within compositional factors. And then finally, we have our last aggregate, which is the aggregate of consciousness. So we have these 5 aggregates.
So tila ani kito pombonga kenji choni kam choje so shi guba karre lona so the song na teni chaso nyomo kiure mugiwa la so bi shipa ta so se majewa ta na majewa je majewa zunge ka ta nongi shipa ani chi linga ki namger o tsoma ta so na teni kiure teni koso kisa ka jab so tsoma ya bu shi gi chetala tanda dino lo pombonga kenji choni kam choje so tsoma te do so rong la gerjan chaso tsawa yore to so jare la.
And the reason why we speak about the 5 aggregates and also the 12 sources of experience and the 18 constituents, these are just different ways of organizing conventional reality. But the reason why we specify these is because we were talking about the 10 non-virtues, the 10 non-virtuous actions. And the 10 non-virtuous actions arise from afflictions. And the afflictions arise from being in contact with these 5 aggregates, 12 sources of experience, and the 18 constituents. So if we know better, if we better know these 3 categories, then it will be easier to manage our afflictions and not to engage in non-virtuous actions.
다 아니 봉봉하나 때니 던디지도 가르라나 도몽아서 지 봉보제지 데레라 지진 지바지 연도 원화진 통화이나 딜란 통화라 지바진 통화라 때니 소소라 아니 자와 디와진 데이리스 자와 디와티 온기 기오디 디기질라 다게 봉봉하는 듯이 봉보도 그 마송와라 송와도 마임발라 임바 존도네 존도 친절로긴 디온기 너차티오레스 너차 디온기 다니다 파소 진지보다 소소 타와도 직제위 체들라 아니 몽고카 타레 자마시레 다코 가르체기나 소체기나 제레 가리나 디노는 지야지 우레스 소테 파소 진지바던 통 딜레테는 소와 디와지기 디게옹기 농기 데시데 그때 친절로지 하주분 펜시바 셀리기바지 드리지야 nd저 그 정도 딜레테니 자소 저분도 자티우라 딜레테니 너차 디옹기 다 파소도 타위 체들라 아니 자마시레 가마디오레 소체레 아니 소마데 티는 용고레스.
So the way that we engage in non-virtuous actions by way of by understanding the 5 aggregates is as following. So normally, let's say we have the aggregate of form, right? So let's say there is a beautiful form, there is a beautiful shape with beautiful colors. So we see that form and we feel it is attractive. It's an attractive form. We like that form. On the basis of perceiving something as attractive or as beautiful, then the second aggregate comes along, which is the aggregate of feeling. So a pleasurable feeling arises whenever we perceive something as beautiful, whenever we perceive something as attractive. Then comes the third aggregate, the aggregate of discernment. The aggregate of discernment at that point does not discern correctly, does not differentiate correctly. So it starts to project qualities upon the object that we've perceived as attractive, that we've perceived as beautiful. And then by projecting those qualities, then the fourth aggregate comes along, which is the aggregate of compositional factors, those mental functions, and the mental function of attachment arises. And then we start feeling attachment, which means attachment is the mind that wishes to possess. I want to possess that beautiful, attractive object, right? So then we allow ourselves to engage in any non-virtuous actions in order to get what I want. We're able to lie, we're able to kill, we're able to use harsh speech or divisive speech. We do any action necessary to get what we want. Why? Because we feel attachment. Why? Because we've superimposed qualities on the object. Why? Because we felt a pleasurable feeling. Why? Because we perceived the form as beautiful. So here we see the whole sequence, how it works.
다 디노지 지바레 다 지 만지바지도 지 연도 모아지 드린 통데 다 지게 더 모아 진 토와 되는 수속이 되는 저와 등을 진대 우리 저와 등을 띄어 그 질을 따진 듯이 그 용조 친절로 지 줬다니 파 돈이 예도 모아 진도 딜리 첼리 기바이도 모아 지 줬다니 디니 띄어 게 컨트롤 기고 다 컨트롤 기고네 아니요 아니 소체 봐도 제가 컨트롤 때서도 미티도 마체와도 잘라티도 마체와 제제들 용거 지시래 아니 소체래 가리 이는 담만다게 링하게 니켜 탐치때 온티니 종용레스
And the same, and the same, like if we take the opposite example, is true. Let's say we see a form, we see an object, right, which is a form, color, whatever, and we feel it's ugly, we feel it's repulsive. So then, on that basis, we feel something which is unpleasurable. It's not something which is nice, it's an unpleasurable feeling. So then our discernment, once again, that doesn't see correctly the object, superimposes negative qualities upon the object. We're exaggerating the negative qualities of the object. And on the basis of that, we feel aversion. The mental function of aversion or anger or hatred arises. And in order to separate ourselves from that object, in order to avoid that object, we engage in all sorts of actions, like once again, like killing, like stealing, like lying, like divisive speech. So once again, we engage in non-virtuous actions because of anger, because of exaggerating their negative qualities, because of a unpleasurable feeling, and then because of perceiving an ugly form.
tani chonchon she ni takini chi magiwan rao to tani chi nyomo chi rao to tani chonchon she de yores ngaso ti she wala gupa kari yos tiga ngala kar pe to tos tanda nomba so ji ki jongo no la to to ne sanji ki yo deji chunga chu tomo so de ne dinga shi par ja ze dinga de she ja ti ni pa de no kanjong pon ja ze ji dinga ndriba dinga to ji kanjong ni to tombo so ja res ta so sanji ki ti she ja ngaso me she ki ti chonchon she na ngala pedo karandu ngal ni dichi yongala ngal goat dichire mato nyomu toso mari te chonjo jodena pedo karando zega drawata thoma leire ni choso le parche le jires.
And I think that perhaps you might be asking yourselves, why are we talking about this, right? Why are we talking about non-virtuous actions? Why are we talking about affliction? What is the need for that? What are the benefits of knowing all of this, right? And it's very important. This question is a common question. And it's important because when Buddha Shakyamuni began to teach the Dharma, he started with a teaching called the Four Noble Truths. In this teaching, he began talking about suffering. He said suffering has to be known. And then he said the origin of suffering has a cause. And that cause of suffering, the origin of suffering has to be abandoned. And then he said there is the possibility to eliminate, the elimination of suffering and its causes is possible, and this has to be achieved, and which is cessation, the cessation of suffering and its causes. And then he said, and there is a path that leads to the cessation of suffering and the causes of suffering, and this has to be cultivated. So here he is showing us a path in order to get rid of the suffering that we do not wish for.
다 드니셰고 구바소 더 카르레즈나 페나가소 지탱가 가서로 펜세 저거 펜세 마저이 kopsle용 파쇼 다우티가 아니 다우티라 마시카 젠도 다우티는 최차 간덴도 아니 다우티가 지금 막 저희 톱시드 가른도 또 소마도 시고요레스 또 소마 마시와니 소소원을 지금 최차도 지금 막 가세고 뒤제바이나 파쇼 그 절말로나 소소고 맞죠. 제가 타오 말했어. 디노제 나송용 소소 마디 와서도 맞게 와서 게또 디와 메파서 게그 뉴모도 야보 중고 세니 아니디 카테 자와이나 소소를 디와든 조녀도 저도 친들베 디치녀도 저도 그 어디 쳐버 요 집세지 아니다 아니 도모 도소고 니교도 송데레스.
So therefore, the reason why Buddha Shakyamuni spoke about all of this in his first teaching, the reason why we're speaking about non-virtuous actions and afflictions in these first, like beginner classes, are because, let's say, for example, let's take an example, like for example, during a war, if two countries get into war and they're warring each other, we want to win over the other country, right? We want to win the war. So if we want to win the war, we need to understand our enemy. We need to understand what strategies they're using. We need to understand what weapons they're going to use. We need to understand what type of defense systems they have, right? We need to understand everything about the enemy, because if we don't understand the enemy, how they're like how and with what they're equipped, no matter how well we prepare ourselves, it is likely that we're not going to win the war because we won't understand their strategies. So in order to win this war against the afflictions, we need to understand their strategies, with what they're equipped, etc.
이 농시에 땅에서 서서지 니마치의 대사노의 대야 디치치 랭가나도 가리는 공바지는 대야 디치치 영화라요. 토모소서 그 대사 그 공바티 그 기능 소마마 소마서 아니 서서 공바들 대사때 yap소마서 땡고의 댄스 yapı 좀 드리체고다. 토모소 니라 니라 기능 소마 소마서 고요. 기능 소마마서네 땡노의 댄도 감자 같이 yapı 샤바이나요. 그 다다지레로 체마. 디리 토모 기능도 마소마서 디지슬라 아니 제니 지 덴도 깜짝도 다 가르 디친 잘라데 디 아니 제니 코 디와타 신데기 리기 디와타 드리진 소고다 디 고바 노제 도모가서 생게 디완서 발라용 세 마디와 중에 그 생게 노고 차소녀무 니교도 파메 봐서 데니 제니 서 디와타 도고요레스.
Also, another example, it's if we want to spend a nice day at home, we want to feel comfortable at home. First, the first thing we need to do is that we need to clean our house. And once we've cleaned our house, then we can start organizing. We can put the furniture here, the furniture there. We can set the sofa nice and comfortable, or the chair, or whatever we have, or our bed, whatever we have at home, right? Our table. All the furniture can be probably organized and set in a nice, comfortable way, so then I can enjoy the house and I can feel comfortable at home, spending the day at home. But first I need to clean the house, right? So similarly, if I want to be comfortable with my own mind, if I want to experience happiness with my own mind, first I need to clean my mind of these afflictive mental states, such as attachment, anger, and other afflictions. And once I've cleaned my mind of these afflictions like attachment and anger, then I can cultivate beneficial mental states.
가서 걸막하시마도 뭐도 제 저한테 요나 아니 던다 도로치나 야사리 기세 정도다.
Yes. So now we have about 8 minutes left. So if you'd like to ask some questions, then now it's a good time. Just before you go into your questions, I know that Julieta, you had some questions, right? Would you like to ask them yourself, or because I have a text message I can read also. So whatever you prefer. If you can just let me know.
Questions, that's super, it's not very good, but I'll try. I have realized that maybe read what I wrote, because I'm very bad at repeat what I said.
Okay. Gisela tanda zoom nano lagi lobdu di kadishua chigire ko ani chudun la WhatsApp ni tiwa tara ani nye tanda di tane nye kiran la loginda. 1 second, I'm just opening my WhatsApp because I got the text message there. So let me see.
딱히 아니 주정하는 직송소 되이나.
dire 다가라래 Gisela.
뒤는 아마 지자로. 아니 거글나.
컨트롤 콜라를 봐.
어레샤 컨트롤 거글나 아니 코로 집어 저도 데 거서 셈발 컨트롤 말로 왔더니 뉴스. 이나 저로 판도 뭐뭐냐도 소년도 그 컨트롤로 운동스니 어디까지 제거해서 되는지 저 안타간 치료된 성소. 다디니 되니래 땡가로를 찾아나 가로 메마니 또 드리토니 또 데라 가로 타로 나자들레. 디나자도 가서 포바게 지나 소롱 나자르다. 다치도 생각 나자래. 다디 나자디 소소 집어 데디 나자도 요마래. 문이 요마래. 뭐뭐냐도 데디 그 나자도 레고. 디 나자도 레와라 니 르니를 딱다 나이. 르니 그 선행 이때 좀마 간디서리스나 도지된 체텐토도네 나로 선노토니 소소가 셈도도 소소가 선노토조도 연식면식 원세고도스 소소가 선노토도 소소가 지 셈도 원세바이나 만족바 통시도 소소고 저거 맞아 파쇼 짜는 저거도 데데 소소 연직 면직 로노 나한테 나자 비자지 레샤 난드마 송송이 띠용이 용도 제바이나 아니 티가티 세메 자토하게 제발 전부 동아르마로는데 냐님도 열라다
Adesso. Tanda geshe la gien nata singinanza di min karisido.
나서 베바지 tello solo 나자 자레스 생가 노라 생가 나자
Adesso. That's it. So Geshe-la, actually Julieta, Geshe-la received your question through WhatsApp. I think Venerable Children sent the question to him directly, so he already knew. And the question, so the rest of you know, the question is about whenever you're alone, you feel okay, but when you're in public, when you're other people, you get more triggered and you get more angry, right? And I think that was the question. So what can you do about it afterwards? If you have if you want to add something, you can also add something. So what Geshe-la says is, he said, in my own experience, he says, I also got sick. I got a mental sickness, and this is normally called in Tibetan lung sickness. And lung sickness means it's a bit like anxiety. It's a bit like you have pressure in your chest, and it's similar to anxiety, right? So Tibetans call it lung disease, the disease of the winds, literally, if we translate it literally. And he says, and I had this for 2 years. So, but then the way I got rid of it after 2 years of experiencing this is that I went to Bodh Gaya on my own to think about it. So then I went to think about it because I realized that nothing outside is really creating my suffering within my mind and creating my own suffering. So I had to check my mind to try to look for where in my thoughts, what ways of thinking am I producing that is producing this disease that is making me sick. And after sitting there and looking at my mind, I found what wasn't right in my mind, and I was able to change it. So in my own experience, I find it's very beneficial and very important to take time to look at one's own mind and to see what's not working within one's mind and changing that. But first we have to identify what it is.
드니 페나가서 느리래 나로로 자자나 디 나자들레 거서 다 조디 소소고 조포도 소소 뭐시바도 다 계자시로 소소가 계자시 응아시 거니 소소 세는 맞죠래우다 아니 파조지 소소 남제 조번 처부터 kuningany도 마요네 제반요도 나오다 공알 가음도 와스 포티냐도 날 특파자도 세티 차소도 저우다 소소고 전이야 디 차소도 소소고 전이 저요 바테 지금이 나자도를 거서한테 계잡자 되마 저런 담은다 게지 나자 담은다 제 소롱 담은다 게지 동도 하세요. 이 가서 전년도 용유 좀한테 러샤레스네 거서 딜러다. 디디 저도 소소가 지 파쇼텔지 저도 나자게 온기래. 나자 온기 파쇼텔지 마가와도 다 니게 갈 동도 되게 지금도 소소마 소소게서 아니 노토데 롱도. 디디더니 어디 운동계 나자들레 오레스 디디 소소가 생의 연직 매직 영직전에 디 셈버스 도보도 레오디메 데즈메 네트 오 당아레시문도서 디는 가야나 가서 내가 디 위거지요 위저 어디 약실에 디거니 되게 싫어 팽도라.
And in my case, I realized that when I was alone, I felt fine, but then when I went with my friends, I always kind of felt suspicious that they didn't like me, that they were criticizing me behind my back, that they were gonna get angry with me. And then whenever I talked to them, they were like, "What are you talking about? You're just making everything up. We don't feel like that. You are projecting that towards ourselves, towards us, right?" And then I realized that it was due to the same illness that I had, that I was kind of projecting this towards them, but it was actually my mind that was fabricating these thoughts, and that I felt I was going to be rejected, or that they were going to get angry at me. So I realized that it's so important to investigate our own minds and try to identify the ways that our thoughts, our thinking patterns that are creating this disease. And then once we identify it, then we can get rid of it. And one thing I found very useful in these occasions, whenever I was outside with others, was to focus on my breath. So whenever I was outside and I felt I was beginning to project upon other people, get worried, and so on, then I would start breathing. And I felt that was very beneficial.
Tanito suzuku zoyo pati ngando jina ngaro sono toye hakko sonte ani di konsan choke ngema sonchi sono arik memba chimbo chika ani soso kundolo soso machipa zoye kosa jacha gacha thambati soso logo zogu doze ne arik memba chipa chika otandi song doze ti ngone ga chudon dra mares 하버드 농비 추던 드라마를 저 소가 체리 빠지래 되게 든지 송도 되게 가서 지금 세 맞게 와도 소소 구조대로 소소 샘도 소소 단지 yapı 제도나 대 배도 전부 요래지니 다 고사 저기 든지 송도다.
So in my case, I had realized that I was creating my own unhappiness through my way of thinking. So I had realized that, and I remembered that His Holiness the Dalai Lama, during one of his teachings, he mentioned that there is a very famous psychologist from the US, and this psychologist he's very famous. He's considered, I can't remember his name, but he's considered one of the fathers of cognitive psychology, and he mentions that in his book he mentions that out of 100%, whenever we're angry towards someone, 90% of what we think about someone is just projected by our own minds. So 90% of what's going on that's triggering our anger is actually produced by our own mind. Only 10% is there. 90% is within our own minds. That's so. Lasso Shema Dachua Yona Sapasan Tanajisare. So this has gotten us to the end of today's session. It's already time. So if there's still some more doubts and with regards to this, if you want to ask anything else with regards to this, you can do so on Friday. And if anyone else has a question that hasn't been answered today, then on Friday we will get together once again and you can ask your questions. Maybe we will begin with questions next time, so you have time to ask all of your questions.
아니까지 좋아요나 교사 돈안리도 요나 아니사 돈아 그래서 얘기 동안티노 돈에 아니지만 가서 잡아선다 아니 되거를 돌래지나 아니 리사relata.
So, and if you have questions now, you can send them. It's better you send them to, I think there is a WhatsApp group of these teachings, but also to Venerable Children's telephone, and she will pass them on to me or to Geshe, and then we can answer your questions.
아니 교학은 용달라마도 레메주지 빨라롱주 사동나지 요테로도 도지 종기 공부녀도 쇼 엔소마라 다시 딜레 지만자 용다다.
Thank you very much, everyone. Just dedicated the merits of this class, and see you all again on Friday. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye. See you on Friday.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Geshe.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Drink tea.
Yeah.